Hi Sushil, welcome to Cloud Sprint. How are you?
Hi, Pushkar. Yeah, I'm doing great. Thank you. And thanks for inviting me. Uh,
Yeah. Thanks. All pleasure is mine, man. So, in this podcast, we are going to talk through your journey, how your life has been so far after your college, and why did you opted for big data roles. So, can we start briefly with your introduction and get to know your career background?
sure. So I started as a backend developer. So I have total 9 years of experience. I sort of started as a backend developer when at Accenture, straight out of college. So I did a lot of JavaScript, jQuery, Angular. I did a lot of backend services in .NET. But then after doing that for 3 years, I felt sort of restricted in the kind of works I was getting. So that's when I decided to, move to big data space, data and distributed systems and data science side of the world, because that was lucrative, that was getting pace, and frankly, like those jobs were paying higher. Right. So that was the motivation. So I started doing self learning, and, it sort of took me around 6 months to 1 year time to prepare, and then start appearing in the interviews, and then sort of for last 6 years I am into this. I'm completely into data engineering and data and distributed system side of the world, where I've had several roles at different places, of different scales, and so that's how my journey has been. Currently, I'm working with Twitter for last 1 year or so, as a senior data engineer there. Previous to that, I was working with a company called dunnhumby, where again I was sort of a data engineer slash backend engineer there as well. So I did a lot of data heavy work, which included Apache Spark, Hive, Hadoop, so on and so forth. And I also did a lot of backend engineering work where we wrote a lot of Java code. We did, a lot of infrastructure on the cloud as well. So my background has been mixed in the last 9 years, but primarily it has been data dominant overall.
Okay, that's really good. So before we come back to the second part of the questions is how's life at Twitter? How's Twitter treating you now?
Cool. So Twitter is a really, really good place to work. Like it is one of the uh, top employers, at least from India perspective. They are one of the top employers, both in terms of, how much they pay, the perks, the work-life balance, and the kind of scale you get to deal with. So Twitter has been so far so good. Like the scale which I got to work at Twitter, that's unparalleled. Like, for example, just to give you the perspective for the scale, one of the pipelines, or like the one of the pipelines that I work with, it has to do with the client events which gets generated. The size is somewhere around 900 TB for every day. And so in terms of size, it's really, really humongous. Like previous to this role, my biggest pipeline that I ever wrote was somewhere around 25 terabytes, right?
Huge.
So right now we are dealing with, let's say, 900 terabytes of data every day, and that's one of the pipelines, right? Although this is, I would say, top 5 percentile of the data sets at Twitter. Like there are obviously smaller data sets as well, but this is one of the bigger ones. So if somebody just wants to, contrast the scale from where they are and where Twitter is, so this should help. But also, I would also like to add that Twitter is like no other company. Like when you have that much data, you also have that much money to process it, right? So, for example, if any of our listener is thinking like how they are going to process that humongous amount of data, they just need to also know that it's totally fine for us to spin up a 1000 node cluster, a data flow cluster, or a data prop cluster. Data flow is serverless, but yeah, you get the point. Like it's okay
Yeah.
to spin up 1000 VMs to process that data, and nobody bats an eye. And just to give you a perspective, like one of the biggest on-premise cluster that we have, it has close to 50,000 nodes, and some millions of vcores, and petabytes of memory. So like with because since we have that much scale, since we have that much data incoming, we also need equivalent computing. So yeah, that's what the scale at which Twitter
So,
deals at. Yeah.
so how difficult it was for you to get into this role at this scale?
In basic sense, the role is same. The responsibilities, as I mentioned earlier as well, that data engineering responsibilities are largely the same, whether you are at Twitter, whether you are at Dunnhumby, or whether you are at another company, right? The more or less the responsibilities are the same. It's just the scale and the kind of technology and the kind of setup, that overall setup is something which is different at each company. To give you a perspective, like one of the biggest difference that I noticed was that it was easy to get hold of resources at a company like Twitter, whereas in smaller setups, getting resources is slightly challenging, right? As I mentioned, that to process that amount of data, you would obviously need that amount of compute, and that is totally fine at Twitter. So when you talk about Twitter's scale, you obviously, if you're coming from a smaller setup, obviously, so I came from a smaller setup. For example, the maximum data I had processed was, let's say, 20, 25 terabytes. That's max. And when you all of a sudden, starts seeing data sets upwards of 500 GB, 700 GB, 900 GB, obviously that was slightly of a shift. But I would also add that a lot of this difference was covered by very the data processing frameworks, like for example Spark, Dataflow. They are already very scalable, and they are very elastic in terms of how the data processing goes. So from that perspective, the difference was not a lot. But yes, when you talk about semantic difference, in a sense that now when you write your code against a 900 terabyte data, you all of a sudden start seeing issues which you have not seen before. So just to give you a perspective, in my previous setup, when we were using Dataproc, I never saw my GCS bandwidth getting maxed out. I did not even know that there is something called as GCS bandwidth. But when I worked at Twitter, I wrote my first pipeline. My GCS bandwidth got maxed out, and my pipeline was choked. So those are some of the problems which you'll see. Usually, the problem is not the core problem still remains the same. The joins, the aggregation, they are still the same. The frameworks are still the same. It's just that you will start seeing a lot of those edge cases. You'll also start seeing the repercussions of writing even the slightly bad code, because at this scale, even slightly bad code means a runtime difference of, let's say, 36 hours and 12 hours. And this is something I'm giving from a real life example. I wrote a filtering logic, which was slightly inefficient. It took 36 hours. I optimized it. It took 12 hours. So those are the things which gets exposed at that scale.
Okay, that's great. That's great. So as we talk, I am realizing that all your discussions or examples are very much around cloud. Okay.
Yes.
So how important it is for a data engineer to know cloud, and which cloud are you well versed with?
Got it. So cloud is important regardless of you being a data engineer, scientist, analyst, or a backend engineer. Even if you're a front-end engineer, cloud is now ubiquitous, and majority of people and majority of industry is moving towards cloud because it's cheaper to get. It's not cheaper, but it's easy to get on-demand resources. Versus, if you have to provision such capacity, let's say I mentioned, I need 1,000 VMs for my job. If I had to provision that on the on-premise, which is shared, it becomes slightly difficult. Whereas on cloud, no problem at all. So majority of the roles in companies are moving to cloud. They have some cloud component, like the bigger players like Walmart, Dream11. You talk about it. You talk about smaller shops as well. Everyone is leveraging cloud for data processing because it's very cheap to start. The entry barrier is very low. It's very easy to start, right? So cloud is very important. Your next question is like, which cloud provider? I think all of the cloud providers have a really good, offering when it comes to data. They are all sort of at par. Some of the tools are more famous. So for example, if you talk about GCP's BigQuery, they have a little advantage because of the architecture and all of the research that has gone into it. But when you talk about, let's say, Kinesis, it's better in terms of from Google's PubSub because it supports the Kafka API, or like it has easier semantics, or similar semantics to Kafka. So people coming from open source world are more familiar with that as opposed to PubSub. Again, if you talk about Google Cloud's data flow, there is no match of it because it's something very, very amazing, complete serverless data processing.
Yeah.
So there are tools. These tools, every cloud provider has different set of tools. There is no such thing as one being better than the other, depending on your industry, depending on your use cases, or depending on your existing cloud choice. Your experience may vary. In terms of the experience I have, my experience has been primarily into GCP, heavily into GCP. So I have worked extensively with Dataproc and Dataflow and BigQuery, PubSub, those sort of things. But yeah.
So is that a blocker if somebody is aware of only Azure or only AWS? Is that a blocker while applying to companies, or companies are like cloud agnostic?
Not really. Like obviously, companies do prefer developers, those who know a specific cloud which they are using, but they do not generally have a very strict filter on that. Like if you are well versed with any of the cloud, that is okay, because as I mentioned, like a lot of the fundamentals are still the same. Like the difference, the storage and compute isolation, that's common across all of the cloud providers. So GCP has GCS, AWS has S3, Azure has blob storage. So no, not really. Like it's not a very strict bar, but yeah, it always helps to know the very specific cloud provider that the company you are applying to, because they will sort of give preference to those people, those who are good in a particular cloud, because it's easy to ramp up. But no, skills are generally transferable across the clouds.
Okay. So if I know one, I'm good to go, right?
Yes.
Okay, great. Next question is around the roadmap, which is like one of the most important question. Why this all discussion is happening to help the candidates who wants to go to data engineer role at the tier 1 company. So So I want to group my question in two ways. First of all, you just tell your way of preparation, how you moved from your first role to this role, what all you prepared, and that will cover the roadmap as well. So if you could club these two things together.
Got it. So, okay. So if I have to give you the journey which I took, so I did all of it. Like I did a lot of self-study. I did not take any, online tutorials which are now there. There were not many tutorials back when I was preparing in 2016, 2017. So now you have a lot of teachers teaching. So for example, there's a guy like named Sumit Mittal. He has a really, really good course. There is Edureka, there is Simply Learn. A lot of preparation material is now there. The way I prepared is I completely did self-learning from Udemy. I did a bunch of courses, which obviously we will link down in the description below, obviously. So the first course I took was by Sundog Education. Course name goes by Taming Big Data. So it's a really amazing course. It gives you a breadth of, it doesn't go deep into each technology, but it gives you the breadth of what big data is all about. And then based on your interest, you can choose to deep dive into one or many of those, surface areas. Then I took a couple of courses on Spark, because Spark was very, popular, and it is still very popular, and it is still the choice of tool for batch processing. So then I did a couple of courses on Spark. Then to get into streaming, I did a couple of courses from Stefan. I think if you're preparing, you might know that. So there's a guy on Udemy, Stefan. He has amazing courses on Kafka. He has 4 to 5 courses. The core of Kafka is in 2 courses, but the add-ons take up another courses. But then people who are kind of trying to move into data engineering space, these are the technology specific things, but there are also core skills like, data modeling, and, SQL, that you should know, and you should be good at. So I think, if you take up a course, on SQL or, data modeling, that is also, needed. So that was my startup plan, but obviously I'll also add that in 2016, 2017, it was slightly easy for people to get into this space. Now there is a lot of more good data engineers are now, in the market. So the competition is obviously stiff, as opposed to what it was back then. But these general, 7 to 8 courses should be good enough to get you started. They might not be good enough to get you a job yet, but they are a good starting point. They will give you a good understanding of what you need to learn, where do you lack. And then obviously, as I mentioned, that you can choose to dive deeper into any of those verticals. So for example, if the stream processing interests you, you can dive deep into, those frameworks. Let's say Flink, let's say Kafka streams. You can, there is no end to the depth up to which you can go. So that totally depends. But I think these courses should be good enough to get you started. They are self-learning. Versus if you are someone who likes to have someone tutoring you, or more like a classroom sort of experience, there are many providers of that as well. So you can pretty much Google it.
And if you could help us with the technologies,
Okay.
for them, like Python is one of them. So
Okay.
what kind
Yeah.
of technologies?
In terms of programming languages, the most popular one is Python and Scala, because so a lot of data analysis and machine learning already happens in Python because of the support, of their machine learning, libraries. So in terms of that, obviously in terms of languages, Python, Scala, Java, but it's not restrictive, because I think if you know one language, learning another one is slightly easier. So obviously you need to know at least one of them. Otherwise, you won't be able to crack the interviews, or you might not even, clear the filtering stage, resume filtering stage. So obviously you need to learn this. But there is no, you don't need to be a pro in any of this. Like if you can write good, clean, idiomatic code, that's just good enough, right? Because, because most of the frameworks are language agnostic. So for example, Spark has adapters for both Scala. Spark supports both Scala and Python, and also, Java as well. If you talk about Beam, it has Spark, it has Scala, Java, and Beam, Python, and Go as well, right? So obviously, learning languages is also important, but I would say, like, if you know one of them, that should be fine. You should not be stressed about that. I should know all of the languages for a particular framework. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. So, would you want to talk a little bit about how, what was the preparation it took to clear Twitter? And during that phase, did you clear more interviews as well? If you want to share that as well.
Cool. Yeah, sure. So I'll answer the second part first. Yes, so I had multiple offers while I was preparing for Twitter. So I had offer from Expedia, I had offer from Dream11, and I obviously had an offer from Twitter as well. So, and for obvious reasons, I decided to join Twitter. But the thing is, so once you have the preparation done, like cracking interviews is just about like if you are getting filtered through, if your resume is getting filtered through, right? So you should, if once you are prepared, it's easy. Like the cracking the interviews for multiple companies is not a very challenging task. Obviously, getting your resume through to the filtering process in big tech, that's slightly, I would say it's half luck and half, how good your resume is, how good your profile is, and, how aggressively you are applying and, asking for referrals around. To answer the first part of the question, that what was the interview process like? So Twitter had a similar process. Like I think there were 5 to 6 rounds. But one big difference which I found from big tech to Twitter, obviously Twitter is still big tech, but one difference which I found is that there was no competitive programming / lead code kind of style interview at Twitter. So it all started with a take home assignment. Then we sort of had a telephonic round, that then high level system design, low level system design, one coding round, one data engineering round, and bar raiser sort of / managerial round. So that's one good thing at Twitter, that you don't have a competitive programming round like other companies. So let's say Google, Uber, and stuff like that. So that's one good thing. In terms of preparation, I would say that data engineering is obviously very important. Like since you are applying for a data engineering role, your data engineering skills are obviously should be top notch. But apart from that, you also need, at least for roles from 3 to 5 years, right? You need some sort of system design ability as well, right? And for roles upwards of 5+ years, you need to be really good at system design as well. So that is also an aspect that you should, consider. Because, for example, you could have learned everything in Spark, that how do you join, how do you do group by, what are the different optimization things you can do. But when you are interviewing at companies like Twitter or companies at a big scale, basically big tech, you also have to be good in system design, because the questions are not that write a code for XYZ in Spark, right? That's never the question. You're always asked to design a bigger system, and then you have to identify the components, defend your choices for the tools and architectures that you are choosing. So I think in the earlier half, when I told that you could do these courses and you'll be good for data engineering interviews, that's partially true, like in a sense that those are essential, because those are the skills which you would need to do your job. But then you also need a good system design ability to crack the interviews. And that's not just true for Twitter. That's true for a lot of companies these days. All of them have one or two system design rounds these days. So that is also something that you should keep in mind.
Yeah. Perfect. And if you want to share that from moving from a .NET to the big data role, so how many X times your salary have increased?
Cool. Crazy question. I think a lot has changed. I'll definitely answer your question, but a lot has changed since 2016 or 14 to where we are 2022. Salaries are no longer tied to technology, but yeah, obviously data engineering, at least in India, still pays good salary, still commands a good salary. So obviously it totally depends on your background, like from where you are coming, like what's your current comp. It could be double, it could be 10 times, it could be it could be 20 times as well, depending on from where you are coming. So for example, if you are starting up in your career, if you are in a consultancy at the moment, so let's say, just for example's sake, you are earning 6 lakh per annum, right? Whereas if you talk about data engineering roles, there are companies those who are paying upwards of 30 lakhs, 35 lakhs for 5 to 6 years of experience, right? So it totally depends on, like, the multiplier totally depends on from where you are coming. But yeah, data engineering and data engineers in general are still commanding good salaries. So it totally depends on your negotiation skills and the company you are interviewing at.
And let me reframe my question. So for a 5 to 6 year of data engineer experience, guy, how much, or a girl, of course, how much one can expect from these big companies, tier 1
I think
companies?
Anywhere from, like, this is an average number. Like, obviously the outliers are always there. So I could say that you can fetch 80 lakh as a base package. And yes, there are people, those who have that package. But in general, a range of 35 to 60, right? That covers the mid-size and the larger techs. A base package of 35 to 60. I know that's a huge range, but that's how the range is, right? You can command this salary, pretty much based on, depending on where you are, right? So if you are closer to 35, you can obviously get 45, right? If you are at 25, obviously 35 is a big deal for you. So that totally depends. But yeah, the salary range is 35 to 60 in general.
Wow, that's like good sum of money.
Yeah.
And should be motivating enough for anyone to try their career in big data space. Yeah.
Obviously,
So this is all I have for the day. Would you want to talk about your channel which you run and the Medium space? I'll be putting all the things in the description. But what all do you cover on your YouTube channel? If you could take a minute to explain that.
Obviously, yeah, thank you. Like it's a slight shameless plug, but yeah, so I also have a YouTube channel where I have courses on, like, the biggest course I have on is the Data Proc, which is like Google's managed Spark service. So I will obviously link that down below. I'll share that with you, so you can link it down below. Apart from that, I also have a Medium blog where I occasionally share, tutorials and any technical know-how or any challenges that I've recently solved, any interesting problem that I've solved recently. So I share that on my Medium. Obviously, like if you have any other question, like if the listener has any other question, I will also link down my LinkedIn below, so you can reach out and obviously ask any clarifying questions.
Thank you very much, Sushil, for your time. It was a very insightful conversation, and I didn't plan it will go this longer. So thank you for answering those questions in detail. Thank you very much.
Yep, no problem. Thank you.